Welcome to the Recruitment Leadership Podcast, hosted by Alison Humphries. The Recruitment Leadership Podcast is here to help those in the recruitment industry gain awareness and understanding on the hot topics faced by those in the business of hiring people. In each episode, Alison Humphries is joined by a fellow expert to offer professional knowledge, insight and advice on the biggest subjects affecting recruitment businesses. It's the podcast to listen to for recruitment business frontrunners seeking expert information from industry-leading advisors. Welcome to the Recruitment Leadership Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Recruitment Leadership Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm delighted to be joined today by Geoff Reid-Hughes, who heads up UK sales for AssessFirst. This is part of our series of recruiting in the future. And I first came across AssessFirst when I attended one of their webinars. I was really impressed by the product itself, but also the understanding of how this can work in the recruitment sector. So I'm very pleased to be joined by Geoff, who himself has, I think, 15 years in recruitment. Geoff, is that correct?
That's right. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. That's right. I until moving into the testing environment, spent just under 16 years helping organisations find strong technical and IT-based staff for their organisations across a couple of well-known recruiting businesses in the UK.
So you did those 16 years in recruitment. You then moved to work for a well-known test publisher, and last year became head of UK sales for AssessFirst. Now, for our listeners, Geoff will have in the notes for this podcast episode, there will be a link which, stick with us, will offer you 10% off AssessFirst services if you're interested. So we'll point back to that later on. But let me start, Geoff, with the question. What made you want to work with AssessFirst?
Do you know, I think there's lots of examples in the world right now of organisations that are trying to solve old-fashioned problems in an innovative, positive 21st century method. And AssessFirst has actually a really exciting platform that I was aware of for some time, but I hadn't really been in the UK at that time, that has a unique flavour on how to help organisations do recruitment in a more effective, efficient and predictive way using science. And there's nobody else really doing that in that way at the moment. And so for me, it was just an opportunity to get into something which is really exciting, that it was absolutely in the centre of my expertise, but gave me an opportunity to be part of doing something that was exciting, different, and technologically advanced from everybody else. And it just felt like a fantastic fit for what I was trying to achieve.
There are a lot of products and tests out there, and I find when I speak to recruitment business owners, very often their experience has been purely limited to what they generally refer to as personality tests. In other words, behavioural preferences, if you will. And in fact, there's a big applications for recruitment that go outside of that. And I've also found that I'd like to come on to this later. I found that recruiters struggle to get client buy-in to this process. Very often. So tests where they are used are often used in a bit of a random way. In other words, we don't know what we're looking for, but we'll make them do a test and see what it yields. So we'll come back and explore all of those things. But it makes some more sense to start with this. What would you say, with your knowledge of recruiters and their clients, what would you say are the business challenges of today that AssessFirst can actually address?
Well, I think there are many. I think the most obvious place to start in the current environment is the sheer volume of applications that our clients are telling us that they're receiving for candidates. So number one is just the practical time implication of having that many applications come into the inbox a recruiter in most organizations at the moment. And then beyond that, to actually find a way of differentiating one candidate from another using something that is objective and verifiable. And historically, I think people would, say, well, that's what a CV is for. And I think the challenge that presents in the modern climate is that everybody's saying the same thing on those CVs. It's very difficult to verify what's actually behind the text that's on the paper or the screen that the recruiter or the HR leader is looking at nowadays. And so in order to be able to effectively choose which candidates are the most appropriate candidates to take forwards, we find that a lot of recruiters, whether that's agency or actually within an end user client, are finding it increasingly challenging to sort the most appropriate candidates for the roles that they're trying to fill. And that, if you take that to the next level, what that means is not only is there a significant wastage in terms of the time spent from a recruiter perspective, but also once those candidates reach line management, either via an agency or via the internal function, there's also a knock-on business impact to them of not having the most appropriate or suitable candidates in front of them at the first stage or second stage interview in that process. And so we see a lot of time slippage. We see a lot of economic harm that's happening at the moment just because of the sheer volume of candidates. But then once we get there, actually those candidates not having any really objective or science-based discernible method by which they can select which ones are the most appropriate ones to take forwards. There are many other examples, Alison, but I think, right now in the current climate, they're probably the two most obvious.
So it's partly a factor of how easy it is for candidates now to apply for jobs, isn't it? That gets you these huge volumes. But there's also some sectors which have clearly been heavily hit by the pandemic and have higher levels of unemployment, and people are chasing fewer jobs. Looking at the flip side of that coin, many of the clients that I work with are actually in very high demand areas. For example, providing key workers, healthcare workers, energy workers, so forth. And they don't have that issue. They, of very high volumes of candidates. And so a lot of those people might be mentally switching off and thinking, well, this doesn't apply to me because actually I have real problems getting candidates. So I don't want to put another obstacle in the way. What would you say to those people?
It's an objection that, as a former recruiter myself, I can very well understand. Having sat in that chair, I absolutely understand what the barriers to success are for somebody that's recruiting, especially so if they're working in an organisation that's providing candidates as an agency. What I would say is this. In selecting candidates, the thing that I found most challenging in my career was to, understand who the people I was presenting as candidates really were, because my clients were forming opinions on me and my ability to select the best people based upon the interactions that they had with the candidates that I had chosen to present them. And so what I'd say is this. I think that what a tool that is a selection tool like ours does is actually allows us as recruiters to understand not so much who the candidates say they are or what's written on the CV, but to go a layer deeper and see who these people really are. And the reason that matters is in a candidate short market is that if we are understanding who the people that we're presenting are more effectively in a deeper way, and we can understand their propensity for success in the roles that we're sending them, that will enhance the client relationship. It will maximize the opportunity to actually make the placement, and it protects the commercial time of the recruiter because they know that in a candidate short market where they find someone good, if they can better understand their propensity for success in those roles that they're presenting them for, they protect the time that they invest in managing that person through a process. So just because we're candidate short doesn't mean that a tool won't help you. It absolutely will. It just means that you're protecting the time that you spend looking for that candidate to find a good role rather than spending more time finding other candidates.
So if you're in a sort of high demand sector, then your point here is actually about giving everyone, client and candidate and the recruiter who's involved in the job filling process, confidence that from the small number of candidates you have, these ones are the guys to follow through on and lavish your attention on? Is that an accurate paraphrase?
I think so. I think that's a big part of it. But the other layer to that is about the experience that everybody gets through that process. And I think it's important in certainly if you're in a candidate short marketplace, any value that you can add to those candidates to make sure that they attach themselves to you and the service that you're providing over a competitor to you will give you that advantage and make them buy into what you're doing more effectively. And when you are candidate short, the value of a quality candidate goes up significantly. So any improvement that we can help an agency recruiter or for that matter anybody in industry, how we can improve that experience for the candidate, but also for the recruiter in terms of the smoothness with which they can identify and manage those people through a process, has to be a benefit.
Okay, so we're saying that actually a really good process, as long as it's not over burdensome, a really good process can actually attract candidates and keep them more engaged in that particular recruitment exercise. I think is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I think, in the modern era, and we've all been there, I've been there myself, where, you make that job application and then a day, 2 days later, you get a one-line email back that says, thanks, but no thanks, right? And that is a very, very common experience, and that's only heightened in the current climate. And what we're saying is, wouldn't it be better that everybody gets a really smooth, luxurious experience from an application process and everybody gets a takeaway, irrespective of whether they're successful or not? If everybody takes something from that engagement, that boosts the positivity of the brand that they are engaging with, whether again that's end user or agency, they're more likely to engage and interact with you because they understand that no matter what happens next, they're taking something away, an understanding of themselves. We give every candidate that uses our tool, they all get an in-depth feedback report, irrespective of whether they were successful in an application or not. The experience that people get from engaging with our tool is actually unparalleled in the UK marketplace right now. And we've found that it boosts the satisfaction and the engagement levels that candidates have with the process that they're in, because they feel as though it's not one-way traffic. They're getting something in return.
Do you have any statistics that back that up, Geoff?
Yeah, we do. So, we have, for example, I'll give you one. So for every 100 candidates that we send our questionnaires to, 86 of them complete all three. So that by industry standards is very, very high. And what we find is that statistically, once candidates have completed those questionnaires and they're involved in that scientific process, they stay in that process. We don't get dropouts. And the reason for that is because they feel as though they're being enhanced, enriched, and it's not simply a scenario where they're giving over information and getting nothing in return.
Yeah, and I can certainly recognise that it's going back a bit now, but when I've been involved in selection or promotion processes, you fill out a questionnaire and then you hear nothing about it, so it does feel very one way. Just a note under GDPR, of course, there is let me get this right. There is a right to decline if your data is being processed automatically. How does that sit with using AssessFirst at an early stage of the selection process then?
So when you engage with our tool, you're in control of your data. It can be deleted by you at any time. You can do that. You don't even need to write into us and ask us to remove it. You can do it yourself. So as a candidate, you are in control of your data. We find that has been the most effective way to build confidence in the end user, the candidate or delegate, if you like, that their data is being processed in accordance with their own comfort levels. But of course, if somebody wishes to decline, they should have that conversation with either the recruiter or the end client. We're not saying that we're automating decision making processes. That absolutely isn't what we're doing. What we do is we empower better decision making with scientifically backed data that comes out of our questionnaires. That ultimately is what AssessFirst does. We're not actually automating a selection process. It still absolutely is a human being that makes a decision as to whether they progress somebody through to the next phase or not. We just empower them with a level of data that they didn't have before they engaged with us.
So one of the issues that recruiters share with me a lot are that they find assessment tools difficult to explain to the client. They find, oh yes, that they are not integrated with their own CRM, and nobody needs another channel to manage, on top of all the LinkedIn accounts and your job board accounts and your other feeds on via different sources, plus managing your CRM. And the biggest thing that comes up time and time again across all sectors is that clients, my clients' clients, i.e. the end users, are really wedded to using CVs as the primary recruitment tool, which makes me really mad, because if it really was about CVs, then everyone in recruitment have been out of a job decades ago. But it's definitely the case that people want to see CVs that in effect say, yeah, this candidate's already done this job. Therefore, they're a dead cert. They've worked in your industry. They've held a job of this level of seniority. There's a tendency to confuse the fact that someone's done a job with whether they've done it well. And to assume that, for example, 5 years history of doing certain things means that that's a guarantee that it's going to work in a different environment. So that moves me on really to my next question. Those are some examples of reasons that recruiters haven't engaged fully in the past with assessment tools. I'd like to just talk about your experience and what the classic obstacles are that you've encountered. How AssessFirst gets over those would be really good to know.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot in there.
Yes, you're right. Let me unpack that. Let me just start with what, in your view, are the reasons why recruiters don't engage with assessment tools?
I think we hear it all the time. And candidly, Alison, as someone that used to be a recruiter myself, most agencies work on a success-based model, which, as we all know, means that if you don't fill the vacancy, the work that you've done doesn't get rewarded. So there is a natural reluctance to introduce into that process things which could be perceived as obstacles to success. I understand that. I've lived in that world for a long time. That is the first objection that we see. The second one that we see is that they don't understand, or people don't understand the science, or they believe that their clients don't care about the test outcomes, psychometrics generally, or some of the other elements that an assessment tool like ours can help with or protect against. And I think that is often a misnomer, because in a number of cases, briefings are taken from line managers who don't have the same perspective on a scenario as an HR leader does. And agency recruitment is broadly speaking, it's about a blend of quality and speed. And I get that, those things are important. What we're saying is this: using a science-based tool, and this could be AssessFirst, it could be others. Of course, our listeners here, they need to be confident on their science, right? They need to make sure that the science is good. That's the first thing. But once we get beyond that, using a science-based tool will allow and present many opportunities. We are not removing human decision-making process. I think that's really important to stress. We're talking about an AI-based predictive tool here, but what we're doing is we're empowering the people that are using that tool to make better decisions with the information that presents. We're not taking those decisions away. Secondly, whilst we would say in a perfect world, we would encourage our users to ask themselves the difficult question. And the difficult question is, do I absolutely, really, 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 really need somebody that has experience in this job to do it for me? Is it better to find somebody that exhibits the potential for success in this role in my environment in the future? or somebody that says they've done it well in another environment which is totally different to mine in the past? So that's a difficult question to ask yourself. But when you use a tool which actually will give you some science to predict the likelihood of success in a specific environment, we can then use that to make human decisions about who the right candidates to present are. So we're not saying don't use a CV. As much as in a perfect world we don't think you'd need a CV anymore, we're realists. We recognise that CVs aren't going anywhere anytime soon. It feels a shame that we're still doing this the same way we were doing this 100 years ago. I think that's probably worth considering, that candidates that have just been presented on the basis of a CV and an interview is pretty much what we've been doing for the last century. However, we recognise that takes time to change. So what we're saying is, if your client absolutely wants a CV, absolutely give it to them. There's no challenge there, but give them the CVs of the candidates that have got the experience, or the ones that you can say have got the experience and are showing a high likelihood for success in your environment. Or if it's a role that perhaps the level of experience they've got in the role somewhere else isn't so material to their success in the future. And there are many, many examples of that. There's once you take out the real vocational trades and the sciences and things like lawyers and surgeons and that kind of stuff, there are many examples of roles which, truthfully, we don't really absolutely have to have experience. What our tool does is gives you access to those people. It gives you access to do what recruiters do best, and that is to sell quality. Because if you can present a candidate, and this is what I absolutely loved about my job when I was in recruitment, if you can sell quality, if you're a good recruiter and you can sell, then if you've got quality to sell as your candidate base, then your clients will listen to that. And the added benefit, of course, is that actually statistically, when you use a tool like that, the candidates that you present into those environments are 50% more likely still to be there in 6 months, a year's time than they are when you don't use a tool. So you protect your time investment as well. So there's many, many reasons why you do it. They're probably the strongest ones. But again, as I'd say, that it's that difficult question you have to ask yourself: what's more important to me here? Is it more important that I hire someone that says they've done it before, or is it more important that I find someone that I can scientifically have confidence is the right person for my environment?
Yeah, I feel that the recruitment industry generally is, gosh, this is going to sound damning. Look, there's a lot of Me Too recruiters out there.
Yeah.
People without any clear differentiation to their offer in a rather crowded market. So if you take, for example, the total number of recruitment businesses who are registered in the UK, which is trading, which is about 31,000, and you divide that into the total number of other businesses which are registered in the UK, bit of a blunt instrument, but gives you broadly an idea of how many potential customers there are per recruiter, if you like.
Yeah.
And you get to an alarmingly low figure of 67 non-recruitment businesses per recruitment business, or put it another way, 17 non-recruitment businesses per recruiter. Now, bear in mind that some of those will be one-man businesses, and some of them will be don't simply never have use for the kind of skills you might be recruiting. It's probably never been more important to differentiate yourself than it is now. And differentiating yourself with something like AssessFirst is a can be a really powerful way to do that. But we need to drill into exactly how you do that. The other stat that I just wanted to raise, which I thought might interest our audience, is about skills. So in my last podcast, I interviewed Geoff Reid-Hughes, who is author of The Future of Work, an Amazon bestseller, and he showed us the science that says a generation ago, skills in the workplace would pretty much last you for about 30 years. It's perhaps 2 generations back. Now many skills become obsolete after about 5 years. Not all skills, but many of them do. And that's a powerful argument to me why we really need to rely less on history written on CVs as a predictor of what's going to make people successful team members, employees in the future. Anyway, I just went off on one there. So differentiation, ability to predict future performance are all good reasons. Let's just focus in on what AssessFirst can actually measure or report on. So many recruiters will have only been aware of what they refer to as personality tests. What can we actually understand better about a candidate using AssessFirst?
So, yeah, thanks. So, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that there's lots of businesses out there right now that will give you what we would call a descriptive report. It tells you who that person was when they took the questionnaire, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, they're obviously the science quality varies, but broadly speaking, they're usually pretty accurate, and they can tell you who somebody is right now or who they were when they took the questionnaire and the environment that they were in. Where AssessFirst starts is where most of those businesses stop. And what I mean by that is this. Of course, we have our questionnaires. We assess personality, we assess motivation, and we assess, brain power or cognitive ability, if you like. And what we look for is the cross-section that's right for the environment that our clients have, that's unique and bespoke to them, to identify the people that are most likely to be successful in their specific environment. So our cross-section, using the data-based algorithms that we have within our app online, allows us to build using, if you would so desire, even things like your existing team's performance data and their annual review ratings or whatever objective data point you wanted to use, to actually build a really tight predictive model that is unique and bespoke to the environment that the candidate is asking to enter into. So what that means is we'll give you the description, we'll give you that PDF document that tells you who the person is and what that means and the questions that you should ask them at interview. Of course we do. We'd see that as an absolute bare minimum. But actually where we get really exciting as a tool, and when I talked to you right at the beginning of this chat here about why I wanted to join AssessFirst, was we go so far beyond that into actually predicting the likelihood of success in a particular role. We also are able to predict the likelihood of two individuals or groups of individuals working collaboratively together and efficiently towards a common goal. We're able to predict the likelihood of certain teams performing in a particular way based on the makeup of the individuals that are in it. And we can cross-reference an individual across multiple areas that they could be relevant for in terms of internal mobility in an organization as well. So we're about looking into the future, not looking into the past. And I guess that really comes back to, the very nature of what I said we're trying to do. We're trying not to look at what's happened historically. We're trying to do it differently. We're the HR software version of an Uber. If we didn't have a business like ours, people would still be stood on the street corner with their hands in the air across London. And that isn't the way people do that anymore, because it's the same way it was done for many, many years. And we're the same, but from an HR tech perspective. And we're saying, look, we can look into that future. We can tell you by a candidate's questionnaire outcomes how likely they are to be successful, motivated, and a good element for the team in in a number of environments in the organization. And we can prove with some scientific rigor that those people get up to speed 2.5 times more quickly than ones that are hired without using our tool. That on average, they're 30% more effective than people that are hired not using our tool. And as a result of that, we can reduce attrition of new hires at 12 and 18 months from, in some cases, as high as 50% down to 10%. So there are some really, really strong arguments as to why an organization should use a tool like ours so that they can automate the science, not the decision making, but the science that gives them the power to make better choices for how they invite people into their organization, or how they select the right candidates to present to their clients to enhance that experience.
Right, now we're talking turkey. So what you're saying is that AssessFirst actually supports the missing bit, in my experience at least, the bit that's been missing so far, which is actually having some sort of science around defining what the skills and aptitude mix is that you need for a job, rather than just asking a candidate questions about themselves and then a client, reading through without actually having thought, well, what do I need for the job? So I've repeatedly worked with people who've done that half of the equation, if you like. So they've never sat down and said, what does this job actually need? They've asked people to fill out questionnaires and then looked at the report for problems. And those problems may not be problems for that job.
It's that classic thing. If you ask yourself, I've got all this information, and you can get information from any one of a number of different businesses that provide psychometric questionnaires, if you like. But it's that classic sales question that I used to train junior recruiters to ask themselves: why does this matter? Why should my client care that I'm giving them this information? That's the most basic sales thing that you teach people is don't just tell them what it is, tell them why they should care about it. And that's ultimately the nub of what we're saying is we can give you that data, if you like, in the same way that everybody else does. I mean, if you want it that way. But the real value of what we do and where we kind of leap forward into the 21st century is we tell you why that's of benefit to you, why this candidate is right for your organization. Or, and here's the killer, in some instances, why this candidate's not right for your organization as well. Because it's not just about everybody being the perfect match. It is also about understanding what are the leading indicators of success, but also what are the leading indicators I can see from my existing team or my community of applicants. What are the leading indicators for lower performance as well? And you don't get any of that from a descriptive standalone document. And that, as I said, that for us really is, if you like, that smoking gun of what makes us unique is that we're going a scientific layer, or probably several scientific layers deeper, and telling our clients, this is why what we're telling you matters, and this is how it benefits you to know this.
Okay, so using AssessFirst will give recruiters a structured way of getting the client to participate in understanding what is required for peak performance in that job. And then we've got something to actually compare the profiles of candidates against, which is actually a big step forward. And you mentioned before that the tool measures both personality, motivation, and cognitive ability. And in old-fashioned tests, I know very often those two things were separated, and it involved two tests. But you're saying this is all in one.
So we have one outcome. I mean, the individual questionnaires are individual around each of those elements, but ultimately it leads to one outcome, and the one outcome is how likely is this person to be successful in your environment.
And again, I know recruiters often say, well, I get a very, very wordy report. What in fact do they get with AssessFirst?
You get what you want is the answer. You can have, if you some people, and this is a great thing about working in this industry, you build that understanding that different people want different things. Some of us love the data. Some of us love to go really deep into the science. Others of us don't. Others of us just want a number to work against and say, okay, this person scores X. That means that it indicates how interested in their profile I am. So we'll give everybody what they need. If you want to go deep into the feedback, into the clickable feedback that we have online, you can do that. You can print and download those reports. You can print and download interview guides and scoring mechanisms to understand how good a match those people are to your competency-based questions. We can give you that. We do give clients that. Some of them just want a user interface, a nice kind of clean graphic that has everything centralized in one place, that integrates with their ATS system, that is a central point of access, and it gives them recommendations as to what to do. That's all nice and centralized and clickable. We have that within the app as well. That's probably the most popular area of the app. So it really does depend upon what the individual wants from it. And the beauty of how we've built it is there's something there for everybody.
Okay, thank you. Right, so nice graphic, simple graphic interface. If that's what you want, it will show you a fully rounded, the area of overlap, or if you like, between the job and the candidates. And you mentioned high levels of user acceptability. In other words, candidates are more engaged in the process because they go through this. So in terms of, there's one aspect that I think is really worth underlining, and listeners, if you're getting interested, there will be a discount code coming at the end of this podcast. One of the things that is coming more and more to the fore for recruiters that I work with is that their clients are looking through their supply chain and they're asking, what are you doing about diversity and inclusion? And it's not enough to say, oh, well, we have an equal opportunities policy. What they want to know is whether their recruiters or their recruitment partners are actually going out to underrepresented groups and are actually trying to eradicate or minimize unconscious bias as well. So, would you like to just talk our listeners through briefly how AssessFirst contributes to that agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the easiest way to answer that is that we're interested in questionnaire data and truthfully not much else. So what do I mean by that? Well, our questionnaires don't ask any questions that you would say are related to the protected characteristics that people are open to discriminate against or show potentially either conscious or unconscious bias against. So what that means is we ask for an email address, and if you want to, you could simply just enter an email address and take the questionnaires and nothing else. Candidates are able to select the pronouns that they feel most comfortable using. Whichever ones they want to use are available in the system, and then obviously all of the reporting data that comes out appropriate to the particular selection that they've made. But we said at the beginning of this conversation that we've got an unbiased algorithm, and what that means is the only data that we collect to facilitate the development of that algorithm is the actual questionnaire data that's generated. So that means that we don't even hold data on things like ethnicity. We don't ask those questions around ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, any of the information that is open to conscious or unconscious bias. It is simply based upon the particulars of the questionnaire outcomes that people have. And we then built an algorithm around that, which scores applicants as appropriate using those data points. So we removed it all. So much so, in fact, that actually last year we identified a potential, and it was only a potential problem that potentially could have meant that in the most extreme case that some unconscious disadvantage could have been applied in one of our questionnaires. And as such, we completely rewrote it. So our cognitive ability questionnaire, as an example, now is structured in such a way as you don't even need to be able to read to complete it, because it's about problem solving and understanding how to, understand new information. So you could even click on that and have spoken word if you came from a disadvantaged environment where your handling of written language isn't as strong as you might like it to be.
Okay,
So
that's powerful.
loads of things have got into that make that, I think, as inclusive as it could possibly be. But you know what? We don't sit in an ivory tower on this either. We recognise that new science comes around all the time. And as a consequence of that, we've got our own science team and that are looking at our questionnaires constantly for ways in which we can improve and tinker and iterate with them to make sure that they are as inclusive as they could possibly be. And that's something that we look at on a daily basis to make sure that everybody is starting from a level playing field when they use our tool.
Okay, thank you. So, from what you're saying there, logically, the earliest opportunity within the, let's call it, the selection funnel, if an AssessFirst or something similar is introduced at the earliest possible opportunity, we're going to get a completely different long list, if you will, for a job potentially than would have been produced from just scrutinising CVs. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the point to make on that, Alison, is just to make sure that our listeners understand is, the use of our questionnaires is unlimited. So there's no kind of decision making that goes in your brain about which people are the right ones to send questionnaires to. Once people become, they join us and become a working partner with us, the number of questionnaires that they're able to distribute to applicants or internal people already within the organisation is unlimited. There's no implication to doing that. So, by proactively sending them to as many people as we possibly can, we encourage as objective, a diverse and inclusive candidate pool as you could possibly have.
Okay, right. So quick, because I think most recruiters will recognise this situation where let's say they're recruiting for a senior role, but there's a cost implication per test, if you like, that basically tends to make people only introduce this at the very bottom of the selection funnel. Yeah, when you're down to let's say the final 3 candidates, and at that point, so many potentially biased decisions have already been made. And I know from hard experience that a client shown the profiles of people at that stage will very often have actually sort of intuitively made their mind up already. And if a test throws up new evidence, they go, yeah, well, I prefer to trust my instincts and ignore it. Or they read the report and they say, yeah, I knew that all along. So it becomes very much a sort of, self-fulfilling, as it were, at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. We're not saying validate the decision you've already made. We're saying we're saying we help you make a better decision.
Yeah.
And
Good.
I think that's key. And I think there are, once you take away that kind of internal conversation that users have around when to spend the money on the assessment, and just say, okay, well, I'm not spending an X amount of pounds by assessing this 1, 2, 3, 5 people, whatever. It's all included in what I've budgeted for the year. It's another form of bias you remove, because as humans, we've already prejudged that situation.
Okay. Final question, I think. Are there any situations that you can think of when it's not appropriate in recruitment to use a product like AssessFirst?
Do you know, the thing I think we hear the most is, oh, well, I want if I need a brain surgeon, I'd like to know that person's done it before. And if I need a lawyer, then I'd like to know that person I'm hiring has been a lawyer before. And so they're not recruiting. And that's in that particular scenario, people would say, oh, well, I'm not recruiting potential, I'm recruiting experience. We hear that sometimes, and it's a common objection that we hear to our tool. What I would say to that is this: we totally agree. I wouldn't want a brain surgeon operating on me that didn't have experience either. What we're saying is, which of all the talent of brain surgeons that are out there, or the lawyers or solicitors that are out there, which of them is the right fit for you? We're saying which of them, even though in some instances you need experience, and we recognise there are some instances where, of course, you need experience, there's still people with experience that are going to be a better or a less equal fit for your environment, that are going to exhibit more or less potential to be of higher value to you than others. So in those scenarios, we change the narrative slightly and say, look, of course you need to check what this person's done before. You need to verify their competence. We get that. We understand that. But even so, we can still use our tool to verify which of those people of experience are the ones that are the best fit for our environment. So I don't see many scenarios, if any, where you can't use the tool, although we acknowledge that in some areas, clearly the importance of experience is greater than others. But even in those environments, it's still about the potential for return as part as recruiting one individual over another, even if we're comparing 2 people that have experience.
Right. So 2 brain surgeons, for example, can both be equally dexterous and skilled at doing the operation, but one will work better in your organisation because of the cultural fit and their behaviours and the way they interact with their colleagues. Yeah.
Of course, yeah, absolutely, and the relationships they're capable of building with the people that are in that particular environment already. Naturally, some people will be better at that than others, given the demographic of the people that are already there. What we're saying is, yes, you need someone that's done it before, but within the community of people that have done it before, some will exhibit more likelihood to fit than others in your particular environment.
Okay, excellent. Well, sadly, we've run out of time, but I think our listeners can tell from how animated we are. We're both really strong believers in this. From a commercial point of view, recruiter listeners, I would urge you to look at this as an option in terms of differentiation, in terms of really adding value to the process. And of course, if diversity and inclusion is an issue for your clients, absolutely look at AssessFirst. Now, in the notes to this podcast, there will be a link by which people can reach you, Geoff. Yes?
Yes, absolutely. If people click on that link, they can reach me there. And as a consequence of coming via that method, they would qualify for the discount code that we spoke about at the beginning of the conversation.
Okay, and the AssessFirst website obviously also shows what lovely clear graphics and will give you some preliminary detail. Do get in touch with Geoff. Geoff, thank you so much for taking part in this. It's been really enjoyable. I'm Alison Humphries of Recruitment Leadership, and if you'd like to talk about differentiation and actually taking yourself forward into the new normal, this is one example of a whole range of solutions that I might be able to talk to you about. So thank you for listening. Geoff, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you to AssessFirst as well.
You've been listening to the Recruitment Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, review and share so that others can find the podcast too. We really appreciate your support. If you have any questions about the topics covered or wish to find out more about recruitment leadership, please email alison@recruitmentleadership.co.uk referencing the podcast. We're also on LinkedIn, where you can follow Recruitment Leadership and connect with Alison Humphries. Thank you for listening, and we hope you join us next time for another episode of the Recruitment Leadership Podcast.